So today we are making the V-Tao, which is the plant-based take on the double fromage cheesecake from the famous bakery Tao in Japan. Tao was founded in 1998 and started out as a gourmet chocolatier. But over the years, it started introducing new products and bakery and patisserie items like this double fromage cheesecake. Now, what's unique about this cheesecake is it's kind of in the name, the double fromage. It has two signature layers, those being our silky, creamy baked cheesecake. And then on top of that, we have a fluffy mascarpone mousse. Now, this particular cheesecake does not comprise as a cookie crumb base. It actually has a fluffy and light sponge cake known as a Genoise sponge cake. Now, these types of sponge cakes, because they typically use a lot of eggs that are whipped into a foam, can be quite challenging to make vegan. But I'm going to show you today how you can make it completely plant-based in a traditional way, but without eggs, and this cheesecake without cheese or dairy. So let's get into making this famous Tao cheesecake, and we've coined it the V-Tao. Let's go. So to make our plant-based Genoise sponge cake today, in your recipe linked in your course dashboard, you will find that there's two variations on this recipe. You can make it traditionally, so with the gluten or wheat-based flour, or you can also make this one gluten-free. You'll find all the information there. Today I'm going to be making a gluten-free variety. However, the method is exactly the same, so you can follow along. So now we're just going to line our cake form. So I'm using an 18cm mousse ring, and you can use these for so many different applications. So today we're going to put our sponge cake in there, and I've just taken some oil and we're going to grease that. You can use some grease spray or even just rub some oil over there. And then just place a ring over the top. Now, I don't want to grease the sides. I actually do want the sponge cake to stick to the sides, and that's going to help us give a little bit more stability and hold onto that volume. And we're just going to carefully wrap around our oil. So we have that base covered, and just transfer onto a baking tray. All right, so I've mise en place all of my ingredients. We're gonna start off with preparing our vegan egg. And today I'm using our panis egg, which is going to replace all the functions of eggs. So I'm gonna combine that with my water measurement. Now, to give it an egg yellow color, I'm using a small amount of turmeric. So I'm gonna add that to our water too. And because this plant-based egg doesn't have any fat, we're going to be adding a little bit of vegetable oil. And just you want to use a light or a neutral flavored oil. Today I'm using sunflower oil. So once you have all your ingredients in your bowl, we're going to start whisking this together on a low speed for a couple of minutes until everything is combined. So now we can start adding our sugar. I'm going to start off with just a spoonful at a time, or about 1 tablespoon. I'm just going to add that to my mixture. I'm going to beat this for about a minute or two, or until our mixture about doubles in size. We want to add this very slowly so we can create a good stable foam. And I'm beating on a low to medium speed. What's unique about the Genoise sponge is it doesn't rely on any leavening agents. The leavening comes from the eggs, or in our case, our panis egg, from all those little air bubbles that we're creating with the whipping process. After about a minute or two, you'll see that it's about doubled in size and it's become nice and pale and kind of thick. We're going to continue adding our sugar, about a spoonful at a time, and beat for about a minute in between each addition. So once we have this lovely thick ribbon-like texture, as you can see when I'm lifting up the batters, it's not like a soft peak, but we can do a figure 8 and it will take like maybe 5 to 10 seconds before it will meld back into itself. So it's nice and thick, nice and fluffy, and this is going to be leavening our sponge cake today. So we're going to add our flour in 3 additions. And as mentioned, you can use the gluten-free option or wheat flour. And I like to sift it in just to make sure we have no lumps. And we're just going to fold that in. We don't want to deflate our foam. Just make sure you scrape it underneath the bowl as well. Now I also, just right at the end, I like to get a whisk and do a few folds with the whisk, just to ensure that we don't have lumps in our sponge cake, and we don't want to deflate it too much either, or overwork the batter. So just kind of doing a few stroke-throughs just to make sure it's nicely incorporated. So now we can transfer into our prepared mold. Just smooth the top out. Just give that a nice good tap. We don't want any large air bubbles in there. Now we can get this going into the oven. So my oven just went off and my sponge cake is all done. You can see it's a nice golden color, and I did already check the core temperature. It's at 95 degrees Celsius, so I know it's completely cooked through. I'm going to actually let this cool in the oven just to ensure our sponge cake doesn't collapse. So we're just going to be nice and gentle with the cooling, and we'll come back in a couple of hours before we cut this and set it into our cheesecake base. Now we can start preparing our baked cheesecake base. Now I've already gone ahead and made my vegan cream cheese, and you will find a link in your course dashboard of how to make your own soy-based vegan cream cheese. There's also an option to make it almond. So if you are preparing this for someone who is allergic to soy, there is an almond variety as well. The soy one is very easy to make and prepare, so I've already gone ahead and done that. I would recommend not to use a store-bought one because the ingredients may not set when we bake them. So the almond or the soy-based homemade one is the way to go. So I'm going to add that. I've just measured it out into my food processor. I'm just using a little one here. You can also just use a hand mixer, whatever you prefer. We have some plant-based cream, so you can use your favorite. You can use a coconut cream, or I'm using the Flora whipping cream. Now this recipe will call for something called lactic acid. Now lactic acid is completely plant-based. It comes from the fermentation process. You may have heard of lactic acid, or in things like yogurt, it's going to give it that tart sort of flavor. If you can't get lactic acid, you can use lemon juice, and there'll be an alternative of how much lemon juice you need to use. But the lactic acid gives it the very authentic tart or fermented sort of flavor that you would find in cream cheese or yogurt. And then we have our setting agent. I'm using some iota carrageenan today. And if you can get iota carrageenan, it's going to give a more authentic texture, but you can also use the agar-agar. We have our potato protein 300 for some emulsification and to give a lovely silky smooth texture, and we have a small amount of cornstarch for thickening, and it's also going to slow down the setting and cooking process, give it that beautiful texture. And a little bit of melted vegan margarine, and that's going to be for flavor and a little bit of fat too. There was also some salt in there too, so that's already gone in. And then all we need to do is just blend everything until it's nice and smooth. So now that our cheesecake filling is done, I'm going to start cutting my sponge cake. So it's completely cooled down now. And I'm just going to run my knife around the edges just to release it. And it's looking lovely, nice and fluffy and spongy. And this was actually the gluten-free one that we did. Now you want to go ahead and just quickly clean and dry your mousse ring, because we're going to use that again. Now we're going to take some foil and just grease the base again. And this time we are going to grease the sides as well. Back onto our tray. Now we want to cut about 1/2 inch, which is 1.25 centimeters. You can go and use a ruler or just go by eye. I'm just going to make a marking around the edges. And then once you've made an incision all the way around, then we can just gently saw back and forth with our cake knife or our bread knife to get a nice even layer of our sponge cake, and then just place that into your form. And then for the balance, we're just going to trim off that excess. Just those kind of coloured parts, we don't want those. I think the top's pretty pale, I don't mind that. And I'm just going to cut this up into some smaller pieces because we're going to use this as our crumb. I'm just going to put that on a tray for now. Set that aside. So now that we have our nice layer of sponge cut, we can top it off with our baked cheesecake batter. And we're going to get this going into our preheated oven. Okay, so our cake is ready, our cheesecake. I just wanted to show you guys. So it's actually puffed up quite a lot, almost like a souffle. And when I just give it a little shake, it jiggles. So it's not liquid anymore, it has set. I did actually end up putting another 5 minutes, so I did 30 minutes baking. Now I'm actually going to let this cool down in the oven. So I'm going to just shut the door here. And I'm going to let this guy cool down in the oven completely. It is actually going to sink down a little bit. That's totally normal because that's our potato protein is really puffed it up, given that lovely texture that we're looking for. And it is going to fall down a little bit. So that's completely fine. We're going to let this cool down in the oven for about 2 or 3 hours before we put it in the fridge for at least 3 hours. So we're going to do that now. I'm going to set that aside. So if you've never prepared a pastry cream before, I'm going to go through all of the steps how to do that. The way that we are creating our pastry cream today is very much the the same as you would create one with traditional eggs. So pastry cream is essentially just a custard, a cooked custard containing eggs, cream, milk, and sometimes butter. But of course, we're going to make everything plant-based today. So the first thing that we need to do is prepare our vegan egg. So we are using our panis egg today, so our vegan whole egg replacer. And I'm just going to add that powder straight into our measurement of water to start hydrating it. And what the egg is going to do, or in our case, our vegan egg, is emulsify our ingredients. It's also going to have some setting agents as well. So as it heats up, it's going to set. As it cools down, it's going to set. It's also going to give a nice creamy texture to our pastry cream as well. I'm also adding a very small amount of turmeric, and that's just going to give us that egg yellow color, and that's optional. You don't have to use it, but I think it makes it look even more authentic. And I'm just going to whisk those together just to start the hydration process so we can start activating all of those functions. Now to that, we're going to be adding our measurement of sugar, and I'm just using a white granulated sugar. And to this mixture, our vegan egg and the sugar, we're also going to be adding our starches. Now in traditional pastry cream, you do use a starch. We typically use cornstarch or flour, but to make it gluten-free today, we're using the cornstarch. So we can use it for both gluten-free or for the traditional. And also some pudding mixture, vanilla pudding mixture, or what we call custard powder. And what this is a heat activated custard powder. So it's essentially just a starch with some flavor and color, but this is used a lot in the pastry kitchen to give the authentic taste and texture, and also add a little bit more thickening and a bit more color as well. So we'll just add that together, and we're going to whisk all of that. And then we'll be left with like a paste consistency. Okay, so we're going to set that aside. And while that is hydrating, we're going to start heating up our plant milk and our plant cream. You can use any type of plant milk that you like. I always like to use a unsweetened variety. So I'm using soy milk today, but oat milk works really well. Or if you like almond milk, you can use almond milk. And some vegan plant cream, so you can use coconut cream, or one of my favorites is the Flora plant whipping cream, which you can use for heat activated applications. So we're going to add that with the cream just to give it a bit, with the milk, just to give it a little bit more creaminess and richness. The margarine we're going to set aside. I'm going to add that at the end. So we're just going to slowly bring this up to 80 degrees Celsius. And because this is such a small quantity, I have opted to use a very small saucepan to make this pastry cream. You can just go by eye for the temperature, or you can use your probe thermometer. As soon as we get to 80 degrees Celsius, we're going to take about a third of this mixture and transfer it in with our vegan egg and starches. And we're just going to whisk that together. When we do this with traditional eggs, this is what we would call tempering the eggs. So we don't want to engage it with too much heat all at once, otherwise you end up with a scrambled eggs. And you will get a similar result when you're using panis egg because it has all of the same functions that eggs do. So we're just going to do it in the same way. So the method is very similar. Okay, so we're going to get this back onto our heat. We're going to pour that starch and vegan egg into our remaining plant milk and cream whilst whisking. Let's make sure you get all of that in there. And we're going to cook this pastry cream until it starts simmering and getting thick. So I've got it over sort of like a medium heat. It's not quite simmering yet though, so just waiting until get a little bit more heat. There we go, we've got some bubbles. So I'm going to just make sure that all my starches are cooked through. And to do that, you can check it with a thermometer. You want to bring it up to 94 degrees Celsius, or on a low simmer for like about 30 seconds or so. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to gauge. Another trick to tell whether the starches are cooked is just to get in there with a little spoon and give it a taste and make sure that you don't have any raw flour kind of flavor. There we go. So I've just switched the heat off. You can see the colors come out now too, that from our custard powder and the turmeric together. It's got a very authentic pastry cream color. Now I'm going to be adding my vegan margarine, and I use a firm variety, which is like a high fat variety. I'm just going to whisk that in until it's nicely emulsified. Now I want my pastry cream to cool down very quickly. So I'm just going to pour it onto this tray. So I've got some more surface area. Don't worry if you take it out and it looks like a little bit lumpy, because we're going to blend it later until it's smooth. And just some cling wrap to contact. And just to cool that down super fast, I'm just going to put this into the refrigerator, or you can even put it in the freezer for like 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes. And that will cool down so we can process it and move on to the next step. So I set aside my remaining cake that I'm going to be using for the crumbs on the outside of our Tao cheesecake. Now, if you have just cut this up and your cake is still quite moist, you can pop the tray in the oven to dry it out for like 10 to 20 minutes. However, because I had this sitting out for several hours and I'm using the gluten-free sponge cake, it's actually dry enough for me to crumble it into the crumbs now, so I'm not going to dry it in the oven. So I've just got my little food processor here, and I'm just going to put that in. I might just do half at a time, just so we don't overcrowd it. And we'll give it a good pulse. Get it nice and fine. Yeah, that looks good. So we've got like a nice fine crumb situation. And if you do dry your cake out in the oven and it's really, really dry, don't worry about that, because once we put it on the outside of the cake, it will soften up as well. If you're not using your cake crumbs right away, just transfer them into a container that can go into the refrigerator for at least a week, or you can also make this ahead of time and keep them in the freezer as well. So now we can start putting together our vegan mascarpone mousse. I already have my pastry cream prepared and it's been chilling. So it's firmed up now. Now I want to process this until it's nice and smooth. And the easiest way to do this is in a food processor, because it's a small quantity. I'm using my trusty little mini one. So we're going to pop that in there. And you can see with that panis egg, it's got that nice elastic texture that you get from a traditional egg custard or egg pastry cream. So it's really going to have a very authentic texture. And we just want to ensure that there's no lumps at all, that it's super, super smooth and silky. Now I'm just going to go ahead and measure out how much I need, because it's not going to be this full amount. Okay, perfect. And you can snack on the rest. Now, because this is a mousse, we are going to be adding some whipped cream to give a nice lightness to it, and also the texture that we are looking for, that nice fluffy texture. So I've gone ahead and measured out already my vegan whipping cream. And I always like to add some confectioner's sugar to my whipping cream. I do find with the plant-based whipping cream just adding that confectioner's sugar is going to stabilize the foam. So it's important to add the amount of sugar to the whipping cream as well. So I'm going to whip this on a low to medium speed until we have nice stiff peaks. Now we've got nice stiff peaks, we can set our cream aside. Now in my other bowl here I have my vegan cream cheese, which I've already prepared, our fromage frise. And I'm just going to beat this until it is nice and smooth. Sometimes it can get a little bit firm in the refrigerator. We just want to, make sure it's smooth. Okay, lovely. Now in my two little bowls here, we have some more confectioner's sugar. And then I have my iota carrageenan. Now the iota carrageenan is going to act as a stabilizer and also absorb a lot of moisture. So what's great about iota carrageenan is we can use it as a thickening agent, a stabilizer, and also to improve the texture of our product, especially when we're working with mousses and creams and anything that we're going to be freezing. It's really going to improve the quality, our freeze-thaw stability, and it also gives an additional creaminess to our vegan dairy alternatives. So I really love it in this recipe, and I always like to mix my iota carrageenan or any type of functional ingredient that can clump up with a little bit of sugar. And that's just going to help disperse the powder and ensure that when we mix it, especially when we're doing it in like a cold application like this, that it's going to blend in very well. Okay, so I've mixed that with the sugar. I'm going to add it to my cream cheese and give this a good mix. Now in your recipe, you'll also find an alternative. You can use xanthan gum as well. It's not quite the same, so if you can't find iota carrageenan, you can use xanthan gum, but if you can find iota carrageenan, it's an amazing vegan ingredient to use. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my pastry cream that we blended smooth and give that a good blend. Now we can start adding our vegan whipped cream to our base. And we just want to fold this through, keeping it nice and light. And we just want to keep on folding until we can't see any streaks of our whipped cream. So I've had my double fromage cheesecake. It has cooled in the oven for a couple of hours, and then I had it in the fridge for a few hours. So it's completely set now. And you'll notice if you touch it, it is a lot softer than, say, a traditional New York style baked cheesecake. And that's completely normal. That's the texture that we are going for. And it will have shrunk a little bit or reduced down from when you first saw it in the oven when it was done. So that is normal. That's why it's kind of a little bit wrinkly. We're going to put our mousse on top now. And I like to use an offset spatula to take off that excess mousse. Now you're going to have some mousse left over, maybe not as much as mine, but just pop that into the fridge because we're going to be using this later when we start decorating. And I'm going to put this into the freezer. I'm just lightly putting some cling wrap on top, especially if your freezer has some different ingredients in there. We just don't want any other smells getting into our cheesecake. So I like to cover it. So I'm going to pop this into the freezer for about 2 to 3 hours. I want it to firm up just so it's much easier to release it from the form and for us to complete the look of our cheesecake. So our cheesecake has been in the freezer for a few hours and it's firmed up nicely. Now we're going to remove that form. So what I've got here is a paint stripper gun, but you can even use a hairdryer or one of those firing tools that you use to making brulees. So we're going to use this to release that ring. So of course we just want to make sure that we take off our cling wrap. We're just going to heat around the side. Okay, so I can feel that it's loosened up. Another little trick that you can do is put like a bowl or something underneath to pop your cake on top and just carefully pull down. And you always want to do this when your cake is really nice and firm and frozen. Now we reserved some of our mascarpone mousse in the fridge and I'm going to use that to put a little bit all over, and especially you can see I've got a little bit of gaps as well. So we're going to fill in those gaps and put a thin layer all around the outside so we can stick our crumbs onto it. And this doesn't need to be perfect, you just want to get a fairly even thin layer all over your cake. And if your cake is really, really frozen and it starts freezing up on you before you can put your crumbs on, you can just heat it up a little bit with your heat gun or a hairdryer. Now I like to use gloves for this because it can get a little bit messy. We have our cake crumbs that we prepared earlier. Now I like to use a brush just to brush off any excess, just kind of patting it down. So once you're happy with the amount of crumbs on your cake, we can transfer it onto a cake board, and I like to put a little bit of my mousse just down the bottom just so the cake will stick. So once you have your Tao double fromage cheesecake completely covered in the crumb, you're going to transfer your cake into the refrigerator for 2 to 5 hours to completely thaw out. You want to do that nice and slowly, so when you cut into it, you have all of those beautiful layers from our Genoise sponge cake to that creamy baked cheesecake and then our mascarpone mousse. I hope you enjoy this recipe and I will see you in the next one. Bye.